subscribe.
Hello and welcome to today's edition of your Hauntic podcast, where we discuss all things spooky. My name's Nick Tyler, the author of Haunted Yorkshire. Apologies about the sound in today's episode. We are experiencing some technical issues and we're upgrading all our equipment. It's not arrived in time, and as they say, the show must go on. Now, today's episode discusses something that's very important to me and very important when it comes to ghost hunting. Today we'll be talking about the fascinating world of parapsychology, how it fits into the stories behind the paranormal, what it is, why it matters, and how it helps us separate genuine evidence from just background noise. And if you'd like to learn more about parapsychology without the awful noise in this episode, my new book, Parapsychology for Beginners by Nick Tyler, is now available on Amazon. Okay, so before we dive into ghost hunting gadgets and all the strange things that go bump in the night, let's start with the foundation. What is parapsychology? It's a word that to some sounds very academic and maybe even intimidating, but it simply means the study of experiences and events that fall outside of what we currently understand in psychology and physics. So in plain English, parapsychology is the scientific study of all things unexplainable. We can use parapsychology to look at a whole host of alleged phenomena with a view to either proving or disproving whether or not it's real as far as is possible. It covers things like ESP, which is extrasensory perception, which means perceiving information without using the known senses, such as using telepathy, mind-to-mind communication, clairvoyance, when a psychic claims to gain information about an object, person or a place that isn't physically present at the time, and of course psychokinesis and telekinesis, the supposed ability to move or affect objects by only using your mind. And then, most importantly to you guys, I'm sure, it covers alleged hauntings and apparitions and other experiences where people claim to see or sense presences that don't have a normal physical explanation. Now, a key thing to understand in parapsychology is that it doesn't automatically say whether or not things are real. It's not a cheat code to the paranormal. Instead, it says, let's study them properly. And it's about applying controlled methods and documenting things and applying logic to what otherwise might just be dismissed as superstition. It asks if people across different cultures and history keep reporting the same kinds of experiences. Is something actually happening there? Are we dealing with a new kind of physical energy, perhaps a trick of the mind, or maybe even a blend of both? The field really began to take shape in the late 19th century, at around the same time that psychology itself was being born as a science. And back then, researchers like Frederick Myers and William Jones and the Society for Psychical Research in London all started collecting eyewitness accounts of ghosts, telepathy experiments, seance phenomena, and they weren't just trying to prove the existence of ghosts, but they were rather trying to understand the human consciousness itself. And that's ultimately what parapsychology remains today, a branch of study that explores the edges of the human experience. It sits somewhere between psychology, physics and philosophy, and it asks some of the biggest questions of all, like, what is the mind? Can thoughts exist outside of a body? And most importantly, can a consciousness somehow leave a trace, an imprint almost, something that we would interpret as a haunting? So now we know what parapsychology actually is, the scientific study of the unexplained. The next question is, why does it matter? Why should we care about something that most mainstream science still considers controversial or on the fringe? Well, the truth is, parapsychology gives us the tools to approach the unknown with open-minded skepticism, and that is really important. When we hear about a haunting or when someone experiences something that defies explanation, it's very easy to either dismiss it outright or just accept it blindly. But parapsychology says, hold on, let's not scoff, let's not assume, but let's study. Let's look for patterns, let's measure what we can, and let's try and understand what we can't measure. Now, this is particularly vital for ghost hunters, paranormal investigators, and even psychologists as a whole, because human experience, especially fear, belief, or perception, play a huge role in how we interpret what's happening around us. Imagine for a second you're in an old house, it's dark, you're tense, and you hear a knock from somewhere upstairs. your mind instantly tries to label it. Maybe a ghost, maybe a draft. And it's a parapsychologist's job to ask, what was the cause? Could it be structural movement, temperature contraction, electromagnetic interference, or just maybe an anomaly we don't yet understand? Now, parapsychology doesn't just deal with ghosts, it deals with how humans experience the unexplained, and that makes it part science, part psychology, and part philosophy. Why? Because whether or not we believe in these things, people all over the world have reported similar experiences. Cold spots, phantom voices, objects being moved by an unseen hand, that intense feeling that you're being watched, phantosmia, which is the sensation of smelling phantom smells. And if millions of people have experienced these things, it's worth studying, not ignoring. Parapsychology is about bringing structure to the supernatural, asking questions that are measurable, repeatable, and testable. It's about separating single accounts for good, strong, corroborated evidence that's too strong to ignore. Taking a parapsychological view in any investigation will always give investigators more credibility. Anyone can go into a haunted location with a camera and start reacting to every single noise, but a true parapsychological approach is disciplined. It means taking baseline readings before you begin, checking EMF levels, temperatures, sound levels, so you know what's normal for that specific space. And then when something changes, you can document it and look for correlations. For example, if you're in a location and you've already done all your baseline testing and have that recorded, and then you suddenly record a sudden temperature drop at the same time as an EMF spike, that's a data point now worth noting, and that's how real evidence begins to form, not through shock reactions or editing, but through careful logging and comparison. And parapsychology also gives us something else too: humility. Because for all our technology, we don't still fully understand what consciousness is. We don't understand why we dream or exactly how memories work. So when we encounter phenomena that doesn't fit neatly into our known categories, maybe that's not nonsense. Maybe it's a clue that there is more to human perception and to the universe than we can currently grasp. So why is parapsychology important? Because it reminds us that the search for truth doesn't stop at what we already know. It invites curiosity and it encourages discipline, and it bridges the gap between science and supernatural. When used properly, it turns ghost hunting from entertainment into exploration, a quest not just for ghosts, but for a greater understanding. So now we've talked about what parapsychology is and why it's important, it's time to look at how it connects to something a little bit more hands-on. The tools we might use during ghost hunts, from EMF meters to cat balls, from spirit boxes to so-called Dybbuk boxes. These devices have become staples of paranormal investigations, but parapsychology reminds us that it's not the gadget that proves the haunting, it's how we interpret the data. So let's start with one of the most common tools used in paranormal investigations, the EMF meter, short for an electromagnetic field meter. Now, these devices were originally designed for electricians and engineers to detect electromagnetic radiation from wiring or electronic equipment. Ghost hunters now use them because it's been suggested that paranormal activity may somehow influence electromagnetic fields, either by drawing energy from the environment or by producing localized spikes. But here's where parapsychology steps in. Before we assume that a jump in an EMF meter means there's a ghost nearby, we have to test for natural causes. Is there a power cable in a wall, a mobile phone nearby, a fridge motor kicking in? The parapsychological method says document, test and rule out, and only when you've eliminated the obvious can you begin to even consider the extraordinary. This again highlights the absolute need to base test locations before you start, so you can understand where the spikes are in that given space. And now on to something that social media has made very popular in recent years, are the motion activated cat balls. Now these are actually just pet toys, lightweight plastic balls that flash when moved, and investigators will often place them on flat surfaces and ask any spirits present to move or touch them, and in turn they'll light up and hey presto, you have proof of the spirit world. Now, from a parapsychological standpoint, the question is, what exactly triggered that light? Was it vibration from a footstep? Was it airflow from a door? Static electricity on a carpet? And again, we use logic and we use repeat testing. So if a cat ball lights up once, that can be classed as interesting. But if it lights up repeatedly, we need to test to see why. If it's lighting up seemingly in response to direct questions and you've ruled out vibration or movement, now you've got some potential correlation, and that's a very interesting data point. On the other hand, if it's lighting up consistently in the same place without being asked any questions, then it's more than likely that that's just an atmospheric change that's causing that anomaly. And again, this is what parapsychology is all about. Correlation, not coincidence. Side note, something that really is a pet peeve of mine, these cat balls are available in pretty much any pet store, no matter where you are. In the UK where I am, you can buy it for £1 or £2. I should imagine in the United States you'll be able to buy it for $1 or $2. There's nothing to them. They're literally a piece of plastic with a little LED light inside. Very Temu Sheen made kind of devices. However, if you go on Amazon and search spirit balls, they put them in fresh cardboard and they'll sell you them at £10 or $10 or whatever. They are ripping you off. Please do not buy these branded spirit balls, because all you're buying is a cat ball that's effectively worthless. Then we move on to the spirit box, which is a device that rapidly scans radio frequencies produced in a burst of white noise, and the idea is that spirits can manipulate these frequencies to form words or responses. Now, from a scientific point of view, what you're hearing is just fragments of different radio broadcasts, a jumble of syllables and static that might sound like something familiar. But parapsychology looks beyond the noise and it studies how humans perceive meaning in randomness, a phenomena we call pareidolia. Now that's the same effect that makes us see faces in clouds or shapes in shadows. So if you hear what sounds like a voice in the static, it might be nothing more than your mind searching for patterns. However, if multiple people clearly hear the same word or the same sentence at the same time in response to a direct question, that's when the parapsychologist suddenly pays attention, because that's no longer just randomness, that's potentially a significant interaction. Another interesting tool used in paranormal investigations is something a little bit darker, known as the Dybbuk box. Now, the name comes from Jewish folklore. A Dybbuk is said to be a restless spirit, a malevolent spirit that can attach itself to an object or a person. These boxes gained attention online as supposedly cursed antiques that cause misfortune to anyone who opens them. Now, parapsychology looks at these cases differently. Rather than focusing on the box itself, we study the psychological and environmental effects surrounding it. Are people influenced by the story before they've even touched it? Does the belief in the curse cause stress, which then could lead to them believing they're experiencing something real, such as a headache, a nightmare, or shadows in the corner of their eyes? This is all something called psychogenic phenomena, experiences triggered by psychological factors rather than external causes. But interestingly, parapsychology could also ask, could belief itself act as an energy source? Could focused intention, fear, or emotion imprint something onto an object? This would essentially make a Dybbuk box a tulpa of some kind. A tulpa is a ghost or demon or spirit that is born out of belief. It's not something that's actually real, but when a collective amount of people believe in something, they effectively manifest it as a true being. And so whenever we are studying or examining a case in point, whether the people are using EMF meters, cat balls, a spirit box, a Dybbuk box, a Ouija board, whatever they might be using in that particular investigation, the principle always remains the same from our point of view. The tool is just the middleman, and what matters is how it's being used, how carefully the environment's being controlled around it, and how they are interpreting what they find. A parapsychologist doesn't say, "Great, this proves a ghost." They'll say, "This is an event worth documenting, and now we need to see if it repeats." And that's ultimately what separates evidence from experience. So now we've talked briefly about parapsychology, why it matters, how it ties into ghost hunting tools, etc. But now it comes to the heart of it all. How do we actually know when something might be real? How do we go from, say, a flickering light or a spike on an EMF meter to something we can call evidence of the paranormal? Well, evidence is never based on a single event. It's about patterns, corroboration, and repeatability. Those are the key factors. So patterns is relatively self-explanatory. We're looking for consistent behaviours or reactions over time. So for example, if a temperature drops or EMF spikes always occur in the same part of a location, that's worth noticing. If phantom smells appear in a certain room or disembodied whispers apparently come from a certain locked room in a hotel, for example, they are patterns that we are looking for. Then we look for corroborated evidence, and this means different types of data happening together, or from a single bit of data but experienced by numerous people. So let's say a cold spot happens in a particular room in an old building, and many witnesses over time all claim to experience it. Now that is the same as the pattern we've just spoke about, but that also becomes corroborated evidence because they're all claiming the same thing. Likewise, we can look for different types of data happening in a single event where many people experience it. So let's say there's a cold spot at the same time as an EMF spike, and then a phantom smell appears and a group of people all experience these. That's good corroborated evidence. Now that's not to say 100% there's something paranormal, but it's definitely something that's worth looking into a little bit more. And that's when we come on to repeatability, and that's when we're looking for things that happen again and again over time under similar conditions. When you return, it might be the same group of people that experience it, but what's even more interesting is when it's new people, when people that don't really know the past or what's happened before, when they experience something, then we really are getting into something we might class as paranormal. So when you're on an investigation, the first step is always establishing a baseline, and this means taking readings of the environment before any investigative sessions begin. Temperature, humidity, EMF levels, sound, light, even vibrations in the floor. All of that gives you a map of what's normal for that particular location. Then, if something changes, say the temperature drops several degrees or EMF suddenly spikes, you can compare that to your baseline. And without that baseline, you've got no context for comparison. A spike might seem paranormal when it's really just the central heating kicking in. So once your baseline is set, the next step is controlled questioning. If you're using tools like spirit boxes or cat balls, you might call out simple yes or no prompts, something like, if there's someone here with us, can you light the ball once for yes, twice for no? Or even just ask it to light up at all. But, and this is crucial, you document every single response. If it lights up exactly when you ask a direct question, that's a possible correlation. If it flashes randomly throughout, it's probably just an environmental noise. Over time, with enough data, you can start to see patterns forming, and that's when parapsychology really starts to get exciting. Now, we've all seen many Facebook lives where they take these cat balls and they ask questions, and it seems to light up on command during a certain evening, and hey presto, again we have evidence of the paranormal. Well, I am sorry to tell you, it is just not classed as evidence of the paranormal. It's interesting for sure, but based on one night, we can't really class that as cast iron evidence. So then ideally we'd be looking at the group returning to that location on a different night, perhaps under different atmospheric conditions as well, and seeing how it responds in that scenario. Now, another part of gathering evidence is observer corroboration, and that's when multiple people experience or record the same thing independently. For example, imagine one investigator says they suddenly feel a chill, while another in a different part of the room notes a drop in temperature on the digital thermometer at the same time. Now, that is not proof of the paranormal, but it is alignment. It's a point where a subjective experience, the guy that said they felt a chill, and an objective measurement, as in the digital thermometer recorded the drop, overlap. And those moments, those crossovers, are the gold dust of parapsychology. But of course, what about the things that we can't measure directly? That's where witness testimony and psychological factors come into play. When someone reports seeing a shadow figure or hearing a voice, a parapsychologist notes not just what they saw, but when, where, and how they felt at the moment that they experienced the phenomena. Were they tired? Were they scared? Did the lighting or environment encourage any suggestion? Because human perception can be easily influenced by expectation, fatigue, even infrasound, which is low frequency sound just below the range of human hearing. And infrasound has been reported to make people feel uneasy, even causing mild hallucinations, especially in old buildings with heavy machinery or drafts. And it can really give the sense of a haunting when one's not actually there. And by documenting all these factors, we can begin to separate experience from environment and emotion from evidence. And yet sometimes, even after ruling out everything logical, we're still left with the unexplained. And that's when parapsychologists use something called case cross comparison, comparing your data with other investigations in similar conditions. If several independent groups report identical anomalies, say spikes in electromagnetic readings accompanied by specific temperature drops in locations with no physical connection, it starts to suggest a wider pattern. And that's what makes parapsychology so powerful. It's not about trying to prove that ghosts exist, it's about trying to understand the mechanics of paranormal experiences. It doesn't deal in absolutes, it deals in probabilities, patterns, and possibilities. And it's about asking, is there something happening here that psychology and physics can't yet explain? And if the answer is yes, then we keep studying, we keep refining, and we keep learning. Watch TV shows where they ask for spirits to make a knock, and then magically every single time a spirit knocks back, and see that as definitive proof of the paranormal. Understand that these are TV shows, and TV shows by definition are businesses designed to make money, and they've got to be entertaining. If they film somebody just sat in a room with nothing happening for 12 hours, who would want to watch that? And then on the other hand, we might see some videos that some parapsychologists have shared that just show a snippet of something happening, and we realise that what we're watching is just the tip of the iceberg, because behind that dramatic event are most likely hours of notes, readings, calibrations, and quiet observation. And that's the real heart of parapsychology. It's the patience to question and the discipline to document the things that are happening around you. Our first stop takes us to Enfield in London in the late 1970s, to one of the most documented hauntings in British history. The Hodgson family claimed their home was being terrorised by unseen forces, furniture moving on its own, objects being thrown across rooms, and strange voices speaking through one of the children. The case attracted news coverage, skeptics and investigators, including Maurice Grosse and Guy Leon Playfair from the Society of Psychical Research. From a parapsychological perspective, this case was fascinating. The investigators documented hundreds of incidents, meticulously logged witnesses and environmental data. They used audio recorders, still cameras, and controlled experiments to test whether the girls could have faked the activity. Sometimes they were caught exaggerating, but other times events happened under strict observation. Objects moved when no one was near them, and knocks seemed to respond to direct questions. So what did parapsychology conclude? Not that a ghost was proven, but the psychokinetic energy possibly linked to the children's emotional state might have explained the phenomena. In other words, the haunting could have been the mind externalizing stress, turning intense emotion into physical activity. It showed us that hauntings aren't always about spirits. Sometimes they're about people. Another fine example takes us to Toronto, Canada in 1972 for the now legendary Philip experiment. During this experiment, a group of researchers wanted to see if they could create a haunting through shared belief alone, and they invented a fictional ghost, a 17th century English nobleman named Philip Aylesford. They wrote a full backstory for him, his family, tragic death, and even the castle he supposedly haunted. And then they gathered regularly, focusing their collective attention on Philip, speaking to him and trying to make contact with this alleged spirit. At first, obviously nothing happened, but then after several sessions, the group began experiencing phenomena such as knocks on the table, lights flickering, and even apparent responses to direct question. Now remember, Philip was never real, he was completely invented. So parapsychology drew an extraordinary conclusion that these experiences were manifestations of group psychokinesis, collective mental energy interacting with the environment. It showed that belief and intent alone could seemingly generate psychical effects, and that means that it's not saying that ghosts are imaginary by any means, but it is saying that human consciousness will probably play a much bigger role in paranormal events than we'd ever imagined before that. We can also look at a case that took place in what's often referred to as one of the most haunted houses in England, and that is Borley Rectory. The story begins in 1920 and continued through to the 1930s when journalist and investigator Harry Price conducted extensive studies there. Witnesses reported a whole range of phenomena: phantom footsteps, bells ringing by themselves, messages scrawled on walls, and even the appearance of ghostly nuns. Price brought in scientific controls, using motion sensors, cameras, sealed rooms, and note takers to remove any human interference. He documented hundreds of incidents, though later skeptics accused him of exaggeration. From a parapsychological point of view, Borley remains important because it taught future investigators how easily environmental contamination can distort data. Drafts, rodents, and shifting foundations can mimic paranormal activity, yet within all that noise, a few events remain unexplainable. Borley Rectory showed us the need for balance, open-mindedness, paired with rigorous testing. The lesson: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. These cases remind us that parapsychology isn't about proving ghosts, it's about understanding experience. It's the meeting point between science, consciousness, and the unknown. And whether the answers lie in mind, in energy, or in something beyond both, every investigation brings us one step closer to understanding what it means to be human, aware, and perhaps eternal. And so we've reached the end of today's podcast, and we've taken a brief journey into the world of parapsychology. We've looked at what it is, why it matters, and how it connects the dots between science, psychology, and the paranormal. We've looked at how careful observation, critical thinking, and the right tools can transform a ghost hunt into a genuine investigation, something that seeks truth, not just thrills. And if there's one takeaway from all this, it's that curiosity and respect are the foundations of good research. Whether you're out in the field with a spirit box, an EMF meter, or just reading and learning from home, remember, every unexplained event is an opportunity to explore both the world around us and the one within. I'm currently working on a new entry-level parapsychology course in collaboration with the Northern Psychical Research Centre, and I really can't wait to share that with you once it's complete. It'll be a great way for anyone interested in the paranormal to start understanding the real science and psychology behind the strange. In the meantime, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed today's episode. It really helps the channel to grow and reach more curious minds just like yours. And if you want to dive even deeper, do check out my latest book, Parapsychology for Beginners, available now on Amazon. It's a straightforward conversational guide to the world of psychic phenomena, ESP, hauntings, and everything in between. So thanks again for listening to Hauntic, where we explore the line between the known and the unknown. And until next time, keep your mind open, your EMF meters charged, and remember, sometimes belief begins with curiosity. Sleep tight.